Lightning split the Seoul sky the night Linda Dees first saw him. Seo Junwoo, a man whose name made grown soldiers flinch, standing over a body that wasn't supposed to exist yet. Their eyes met across the wreckage of a deal gone wrong, and something ancient, dangerous, and impossible stirred awake in his chest. She ran. He let her for exactly one night. Welcome to Afrokorea Seoul Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. More stories are coming up. Rain hammered the rooftops of Itaewon, sheeting silver under the street lamps, and Linda Dees pressed herself into the shadow of a loading dock with her heart slamming against her ribs. She had come to Seoul 6 months ago for a translation contract that paid well and asked no questions. Tonight, for the first time, she understood why the pay had been so good. She'd taken a wrong turn chasing a missing delivery van, and now she was watching 4 men in dark suits drag a 5th man out of a warehouse by his collar. Linda flattened herself against the cold concrete, praying the rain would swallow the sound of her breathing. That was when she saw him. He stood apart from the violence, untouched by it, as if the chaos around him existed only because he permitted it. Tall, broad-shouldered, his white dress shirt soaked through and clinging to lean muscle, his face carved from something colder than the rain. Seo Junwoo did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. One word from him, and the men dropped their captive like discarded trash. Linda's foot slipped on wet gravel. The sound was small. His head turned anyway. For 3 full seconds, across 20 feet of rain and ruin, Seo Junwoo looked directly at her, and something in his carefully controlled face cracked just slightly, just enough for her to see a flicker of something that didn't belong on the face of a man capable of what she'd just witnessed. She ran. The next morning, Linda told herself it had been a nightmare brought on by too much soju and not enough sleep. She went to her temp office near Gangnam Station, sat at her translation desk, and tried to forget broad shoulders and eyes like wet obsidian. It worked for exactly 4 hours. At noon, a black car the length of a small yacht parked outside her building. The driver didn't get out. He didn't need to. The back door opened on his own, and Linda's stomach dropped straight to the floor when Seo Junwoo stepped out into the daylight. No rain to hide him this time. Wearing a charcoal suit that fit like a second skin and an expression of absolute, unhurried calm. Miss Dees. His Korean accented English was low, precise, unbothered. We should talk about what you saw. I didn't see anything, she said too fast, backing toward a revolving door. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Then you have nothing to be afraid of. He extended a black card between 2 fingers. Call this number if that changes. He left without another word. Linda stood there for 10 full minutes before she realized she was still holding the card. A few days later, the threat started, not against Linda directly, but against a landlord who suddenly remembered an emergency renovation that required her to vacate within the week. Her supervisor at the translation firm grew cold and distant, citing client concerns. Linda understood, with mounting dread, that someone was quietly, methodically making her life and soul collapse, and she had a sick certainty about who. She marched to the address on the black card, fury overriding fear. The building turned out to be a glass tower in Uedo. 50 floors of cold steel with SJ Group etched above the entrance in brushed silver letters. Security let her through without a word, as if they'd been expecting her. Junwoo's office occupied the entire top floor. He looked up from his desk when she stormed in, and for one unguarded heartbeat, something like relief passed over his features before the mask slid back into place. You're ruining my life, Linda snapped. I'm protecting it, he said. There's a difference you haven't learned yet. He explained nothing that night. Not who he truly was beyond rumor. Not why a single glance from a stranger in the rain had apparently rearranged something in his chest. Instead, he told her, with infuriating calm, that she would be safer under his watch than wandering so alone with a target on her back she didn't know she'd earned simply by witnessing what she had. Linda refused. Of course she refused. She had built her independence brick by brick across an ocean from home, and she was not about to hand the keys to a man who terrified an entire district with a glance. I don't need a bodyguard, she said. You need a different kind of war. Junwoo answered quietly. Than the one you think you're fighting. He didn't elaborate. He simply slid a new contract across the desk. Translation work, legitimate, generously paid, requiring her to work from secure premises for the next month. She hated that she needed the money. She hated more that some traitorous Parher wanted to stay close enough to find out what that crack in his composure had meant. By the end of the week, Linda had moved into a guarded apartment 2 floors below Junwoo's penthouse. Her own space, her own door, but never truly alone. She told herself it was practical. She told herself a great many things over those first days that grew thinner with each one that passed. She noticed things she wished she hadn't. The way a security detail flinched when he was displeased but visibly relaxed whenever she was in a room, as if her presence diffused something volatile in him. The way he always knew, without being told, when she'd skipped a meal, and how a tray would simply appear at her door an hour later. Never delivered by him, never acknowledged, but always exactly her favorite dishes from a restaurant she'd mentioned exactly once. One evening she caught him watching her from across the building's rooftop garden. Half hidden in shadow, his jaw tight with something that looked dangerously like longing. The moment he realized she'd seen him, he turned and walked away without a word, but not before she caught the faintest, helpless exhale. Like a man losing a fight, he refused to admit he was having. The first real crack in her resistance came 2 weeks later, at a charity gala Junwoo insisted she attend as his translator. A thin cover for keeping her in sight, while the city's elites circled like sharks. Linda wore emerald green that night, and when she descended the staircase of the Grand Hyatt Ballroom, conversation actually stopped. Junwoo's hand found the small of her back before she'd even reached the bottom step, as natural and possessive as breathing. "You didn't tell me you owned a dress capable of causing diplomatic incidents," he murmured against her ear, and Linda felt the words travel straight down her spine. It was the most unguarded thing he'd said to her in 2 weeks. She filed it away like contraband, something to examine later in private, in the dark, when she could pretend it hadn't done exactly what it did to her pulse. The trouble arrived in the shape of Kong Taemin, a rival conglomerate's heir with a reputation for collecting beautiful things he had no right to. He cornered Linda near the bar with practiced charm, his hand lingering too long on her arm, his compliments sliding from flattering into invasive within 3 sentences. A foreign beauty wasted on Junwoo's leash. Taemin said, leaning closer, "Come find me when you're tired of being owned." Linda never got the chance to answer. Junwoo simply appeared, as if summoned by violation itself, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He said nothing threatening. He didn't have to. His hand closed around Taemin's wrist with quiet, bone-grinding precision, until the other man's smile cracked into a wince. "Apologize to her," Junwoo said, voice utterly level, "or I will introduce you to a version of consequences you spent your whole life avoiding." Taemin apologized. He left within a minute, pale and shaken, and Junwoo did not let go of Linda's hand for the rest of the night, his thumb tracing slow, unconscious circles over her knuckles as though reassuring himself she was still real, still untouched, still his to guard even if she wasn't yet his to claim. Later that night, back in the penthouse elevator, the silence between them turned thick and combustible. Linda finally broke it. "You can't keep doing that," she said, "reacting like I belong to you." Junwoo's gaze, when it found hers in the mirrored elevator wall, was dark with something he no longer bothered hiding. "I know what I can't do," he said roughly. "I've spent 3 weeks proving I can resist arrest. Don't ask me to resist that too." The elevator doors opened on her floor. Neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. Every glance held too long. Every meal that appeared without explanation. Every guard who knew to step aside the moment she entered a room. "Junwoo," she started, and didn't know what she meant to say next. He answered the way he answered everything that frightened him too much to speak aloud. With action. His hand cupped her jaw, gentle as an apology, and he searched her face for the smallest sign of refusal. She gave him none. What happened in that elevator? And later, in the hush of her apartment, with rain returning to drum softly against the windows like the night they'd first found each other, belonged only to them. There were no words sharp enough to survive what passed between 2 people who had spent 3 weeks pretending not to drown. There was only breathless closeness, the press of his forehead to hers, the way her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, as if anchoring herself to something solid in a world that had stopped making sense the moment she looked into his eyes in the rain. There was tenderness disguised as hunger, and hunger disguised as fear of losing something neither of them had yet dared to name. By the time dawn touched the windows, something fundamental between them had shifted, irreversible as a tide. Linda woke first, watched the rare, unguarded peace on Junwoo's sleeping face, and felt a terror colder than anything she'd experienced in that rain-soaked alley 3 weeks ago. This man buried his enemies. What would he do to anyone who tried to take this from him? And worse, what would he become if he ever learned exactly how much power he now held over her? She left before he woke. It wasn't cowardice, she told herself, gathering her things with shaking hands in the gray hour before sunrise. It was self-preservation. Men like Seo Junwoo did not keep women like her. They collected them, consumed the parts that interested them, and discarded the rest once the danger of the chase faded into boredom of possession. She had seen in his world already. Discarded mistresses, broken alliances, bodies that simply disappeared. She would not be a body that disappeared. Linda took nothing but her passport, her laptop, and the clothes on her back, slipping past the guards who, for reasons she didn't understand, let her pass without a single word of protest, as if some part of the building's silent machinery had decided her flight was inevitable and pointless to prevent. Junwoo woke to an empty bed and knew, before he even reached for his phone, exactly what had happened. He had seen this particular fear before, not in Linda specifically, but in every wounded thing he'd ever tried too hard, too fast, to keep safe. Fear made people run, even from the very things that could save them. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything, though every instinct screamed for destruction. Instead, he called his head of security with a voice gone glacial and quiet, the voice his enemies feared more than his rage. "Find her," he said. "Don't frighten her. Don't approach her. Just find her and tell me where she breathes." He sat alone in the wreckage of last night's tenderness for exactly 4 minutes before he allowed himself to feel the full, suffocating weight of what he stood to lose. And then he stood, straightened his tie, and went to do what he did best. He went to war. Linda made it 3 days on her own, holed up in a cheap guest house in Hongdae under a borrowed name, before she understood with sick clarity that running had not made her safer. It had made her exposed. Without Junwoo's quiet, invisible protection, the danger she'd witnessed that first rainy night found her sent again with terrifying speed. She noticed the same black sedan 3 times outside the guest house, occupied by men who were decidedly not Junwoo's. She noticed her email account had been accessed from an unfamiliar location. She noticed, with dawning horror, that the men who had dragged a stranger out of that warehouse weeks ago had apparently decided she was a loose end now that she stepped outside her protector's reach. The night they finally moved on her, cornering her in a narrow alley behind the guest house, 2 men with the cold efficiency of professionals. Linda had exactly one coherent thought before the world narrowed to fear and adrenaline. I should never have run from the only person trying to keep me alive. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Junwoo's people had been 3 streets behind her the entire time, close enough to intervene the moment danger turned real, far enough to respect the boundaries she'd drawn in fleeing him. The order had been absolute. Protect her, but do not force her hand. When the first man's fingers closed around Linda's arm, that order evaporated. Junwoo arrived not with diplomacy but with violence, swift and surgical and utterly without mercy. Linda would remember, for the rest of her life, the sight of him moving through that alley like something elemental. Not the controlled CEO from the glass tower, not the tender man from her bedroom, but the man the underworld whispered about in fearful tones, finally, fully unleashed. It was over in under a minute. Both of her attackers were on the ground, and Junwoo stood over them breathing hard, blood, not his own, on his knuckles, his eyes finding hers across the wreckage with a desperation that stripped away every last trace of his careful composure. "You left," he said, voice breaking on the words. "You left and you almost—" He couldn't finish it. Linda's legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground, and for the first time since the rain-soaked night that started everything, Seo Junwoo held her like a man who had nearly lost everything and intended never to risk it again. He took her back to the penthouse that night, and this time, there was no pretense of separate rooms, no careful boundary drawn between protector and protected. He sat with her while she shook through the adrenaline crash, made her tea she didn't ask for, and said nothing about her running. Not yet. Not while she was still raw and frightened. It was Linda who finally broke the silence, Hours later, curled against his chest on the penthouse sofa with the city lights glittering far below like scattered stars. I ran because I was scared, she admitted quietly. Not of you. Of what you'd do once you got bored. Once the chase stopped being interesting. Junwoo's arms tightened around her, and when he spoke, his voice carried none of the cold precision the world knew him by. Only something raw and unpracticed. I have buried men for lesser offenses in touching what's mine, he said. Do you understand what that means, Linda? It means I do not get bored. It means once something becomes mine, the only way it leaves is if it chooses to. And if I choose to stay, she whispered, then I will spend every day proving that choosing me was not a mistake, he said, for as long as you'll let me try. The days that followed felt almost stolen, almost too gentle to belong to two people who'd met across a body in the rain. Junwoo folded her more fully into his world. Not as a secret, not as something to hide from his enemies, but openly, deliberately, as a declaration that anyone watching would understand instantly. He took her to meet the handful of people he trusted absolutely. His aging grandmother, sharp-eyed and delighted, who took one look at Linda and announced in rapid Korean that her grandson had finally found someone with a spine. His second-in-command, Park Hyun-soo, who studied Linda with the calculating eyes of a man assessing a new and significant variable in his boss's life, and seemed slowly to approve. Linda, in turn, let herself believe, cautiously, like testing ice over a frozen river, that perhaps this could be more than danger and obsession. Perhaps it could be a life. The peace did not last. It never does in a world like Junwoo's. 3 weeks after the alley, after the alliance their enemies had begun to whisper about his Junwoo's singular weakness, Kang Tae-min resurfaced. Not at a gala this time, but through quieter, more vicious channels. Rumors began circulating that Linda was a foreign spy, planted to extract intelligence on SJ Group's operations. The rumors were absurd, transparently engineered, but in Junwoo's world, absurd lies could still topple empires if they took root in the wrong ears. Worse, Taemin's people began making contact with Linda's translation firm, offering bribes for information, planting false documents in her old files. Someone was building a case, fabricated but dangerous, designed to either discredit her or worse, give Taemin's faction legal pretext to take her into protective custody of their own. Junwoo's fury, when he learned the scope of it, was a controlled, terrible thing. He's not trying to hurt you, he told Linda grimly, pacing his office like a caged predator. He's trying to hurt me through you. He thinks I'll burn the city down to stop it. Will you? Linda asked quietly. Junwoo stopped pacing and looked at her with an honesty that frightened them both. Without hesitation. That evening, Linda discovered exactly how far Taemin was willing to go. A package arrived at the penthouse, innocuous, addressed to her, containing nothing but a single photograph. Linda, taken from a distance, walked into her old office weeks ago, before any of this had begun. Scrawled on the back in careful English, everyone is reachable, even him. Her hands shook as she handed it to Junwoo. His expression, reading the threat, went utterly, dangerously still, the calm before catastrophe. He's telling me he can find you, Junwoo said, to remind me what I have to lose if I move against him carelessly. He set the photograph down with exaggerated, furious gentleness. He doesn't understand yet that threatening you isn't leverage. It's a death sentence he's writing for himself. Linda reached for his hand, grounding him before the rage could fully consume the man she'd come to love beneath the violence. Then let's make sure it's a sentence, not a war, she said. I don't want you to burn the city down. I want you to come home to me after. By the following morning, Junwoo had assembled the full weight of his resources. Not to retaliate blindly, but to dismantle Taemin's fabricated case with surgical precision. He produced documentation proving the so-called evidence against Linda had been manufactured within Taemin's own organization, complete with timestamps and digital fingerprints that left no room for doubt. He didn't bury Taemin in violence. He buried him in disgrace, public, total, irreversible. Within 48 hours, the rival heir's own board had moved against him, his reputation in tatters, his threats against Linda exposed as the desperate flailing of a man who mistaken obsession for power and lost everything trying to prove otherwise. It was Linda realized, watching Junwoo work with cold, methodical brilliance, a different kind of violence in the alley. Quieter, more devastating, and entirely his to choose. He had promised not to burn the city down for her sake, and he'd kept that promise by finding a sharper kind of fire. That night, with the threat finally extinguished and Taemin's name reduced to a cautionary whisper in Seoul's business circles, Junwoo found Linda on the rooftop garden, where he'd once watched her in secret. Too afraid to claim what he wanted. He wasn't afraid anymore. "I have something to ask you," he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, his composure wavered, not from danger, but from vulnerability. He reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box, his hand famously steady even with a gun pressed to it, trembling slightly as he opened it. "I don't know how to be soft, Linda," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life being feared because softness gets you killed in my world. But you walked into a rainstorm and made me feel something I thought I'd buried along with every part of myself that could still be hurt. I don't want to bury that anymore. I want to marry it. I want to marry you." Linda's hands flew to her mouth, tears mixing with the light rain that had, fittingly, begun to fall again, the same rain that had started everything. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Junwoo. 1,000 times yes." The wedding took place 3 weeks after the proposal, in a private ceremony at Junwoo's family estate outside Seoul, beneath a canopy of white orchids his grandmother had insisted upon personally. Linda wore a gown the color of moonlight, and when Junwoo turned to watch her walk toward him, the entire assembled crowd of hardened businessmen and quietly dangerous allies witnessed something none of them had ever seen on his face before: unguarded, helpless joy. "You're shaking," Linda whispered as he took her hands at the altar. "I have negotiated with men who held guns to my chest without trembling." Junwoo murmured back, "Apparently you undo every defense I've ever built in under 3 seconds." They exchanged vows that were simple and devastating in their honesty. Promises of protection, of partnership, of a love neither of them had believed they deserved until the other proved otherwise. When they kissed, his grandmother openly wept, and even the stone-faced Park Hyun-soo dabbed discreetly at his eyes. The reception that followed was lavish but tightly controlled. Junwoo's world didn't permit unguarded celebration, not fully, not yet, with Taemin's allies still licking their wounds somewhere in the city's shadows. But for one night, within the walls of his state, Linda allowed herself to simply be happy, dancing with her new husband beneath strings of warm lantern light, while his usually stoic security detail watched with something like genuine affection. Later that night, away from the eyes of guests and guards alike, Junwoo carried her across the threshold of their private quarters with tenderness that contradicted everything Seoul's underworld believed about him. What passed between them that night was unlike anything before it. Not the desperate hunger of the elevator, not the fearless intensity of the alley's aftermath, but something slower, deeper, suffused with the quiet certainty of two people who finally, fully belonged to each other. The city's rain returned sometime near dawn, soft against the windows, as if blessing would have been built between them. A few weeks later, Linda began feeling strange, exhausted in a way sleep didn't fix, nauseous at smells that had never bothered her before, and increasingly certain that something about her body had shifted in ways she didn't yet understand. She put off the doctor for several days, telling herself it was stress, the wedding, the lingering adrenaline of the danger they'd survived. It was Junwoo who finally insisted, watching her go pale over breakfast for the 3rd morning in a row, his protective instincts overriding her protests. "I did not marry you to watch you suffer in silence," he said, already calling his personal physician before she could argue further. Dr. Han arrived within the hour, discreet, thorough, accustomed to particular demands of treating a man like Junwoo's household. What should have been a routine examination turned, within minutes, into something neither Linda nor Junwoo was prepared for. "I need to run additional scans," Dr. Han said carefully, her professional composure cracking slightly at the edges. "What I'm seeing doesn't match a typical early pregnancy." Linda's hand found Junwoo's, gripping hard enough to bruise. "What does that mean?" The follow-up ultrasound, performed with specialist Dr. Han trusted enough to call in personally, revealed something that left even Junwoo, a man who'd faced down armed men without flinching, visibly stunned into silence. 5 distinct heartbeats. 5 separate gestational sacs. Conceived by every measurable indication within the same narrow window of time. Not through medical intervention, not through any fertility treatment, but through what the specialist could only describe, with cautious scientific astonishment, as an extraordinarily rare natural event called hyperovulation. Multiple eggs release and fertilize in extremely close succession, occurring in perhaps one in many millions of natural conceptions. In my 20 years of practice, the specialist admitted, I have read about cases like this. I have never personally seen one. The following morning, the news had not yet left the room, but the weight of it pressed on both of them differently. Linda sat curled on the edge of their bed, one hand resting unconsciously over her stomach, processing a future that had multiplied overnight into something vast and unimaginable. Junwoo, for his part, oscillated between a terror he'd never experienced in his life. 5 lives, suddenly, depending entirely on keeping his wife safe in a world full of men who'd use anything against him, and a joy so enormous it seemed to physically reshape his face into something younger, softer, almost boyish. 5! He kept repeating, as if testing the word's weight. 5 of them. Are you frightened? Linda asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted, settling beside her and pulling her gently into his arms. But Linda, I have spent my entire life building an empire. I assumed I'd have no one to leave it to. I thought legacy meant power, control, fear. You just handed me 5 reasons. It never had to mean any of that at all. Word spread, as it always did in Junwoo's world, faster than either of them wanted. By that evening, whispers had reached every corner of Seoul's business circles. The unquenchable, untouchable CEO Junwoo, feared for his ruthlessness, infamous for his control, had a foreign wife carrying quintuplets after barely a month of marriage. The rumor mill, never gentle, turned a miracle into spectacle within hours. Some called it impossible. Some, more cruelly, suggested scandal, infidelity, anything to discredit what science itself struggled to explain. Junwoo, predictably, met every whisper of slander against his wife's honor with the same cold, surgical fury he'd once reserved for enemies trying to destroy his empire. Let them talk, Linda said, more amused and worried, watching her husband's jaw tighten at yet another headline questioning the legitimacy of their miracle. Let the doctors explain the science. You don't need to burn anyone down over gossip. Old habits, Junwoo murmured, though the tension in his shoulders eased slightly at her teasing tone. By the end of the second month, with the pregnancy confirmed stable by a small army of specialists, Junwoo had quietly assembled the remnants of Taemin's old faction, attempted one final, desperate move. Not violence this time, but something subtler and crueler. An attempt to leak fabricated medical records suggesting the pregnancy posed a deliberate threat to Junwoo's bloodline legitimacy. A calculated insult aimed at isolating Linda within his world. It backfired spectacularly. Junwoo's grandmother, of all people, ended the rumor permanently by appearing at a public function with Linda on her arm, declaring loudly and without ambiguity that her grandson's wife carried the first true miracle her family had seen in 3 generations, and that anyone suggesting otherwise was welcome to discuss it with her directly. No one took her up on the offer. Junwoo, watching from across the room as his grandmother effortlessly dismantled months of quiet sabotage with nothing but sharp words and absolute conviction, felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with danger at all. Belonging, finally, fully, without condition. The final months of the pregnancy were not easy. 5 lives demanded a caution that bordered on obsessive, and Junwoo, true to form, became near impossible to manage, hovering over every appointment, every scan, every flicker of discomfort that crossed Linda's face. She loved him too much to be truly annoyed by it, though she teased him relentlessly about it anyway. You survived gunfights without this much anxiety, she pointed out one evening, watching him pace after a routine checkup that had gone perfectly well. Gunfights, Junwoo said dryly, only ever threatened to take one life at a time. This is an entirely different category of fear. She laughed, pulling him down beside her, resting his hand over the unmistakable proof of the family they'd built from a single rain-soaked glance across a warehouse 3 years' worth of danger ago. They're going to be terrifying, she warned him. 5 of you, basically. God help Seoul, Junwoo murmured against her hair, and meant it with his whole unguarded heart. The birth, when it finally came early on a quiet spring morning, was attended by the best specialist Korea could offer. Every contingency plan with the same ruthless precision Junwoo applied to his empire. 5 healthy cries filled the delivery room in succession. 3 girls, 2 boys, each one a small, furious, perfect miracle that defied every statistical improbability medicine had warned them about. Junwoo, who had once buried men without a flicker of emotion, wept openly holding his first daughter, his composure utterly, gloriously destroyed by 5 tiny hands that would never need to fear the man the world called Unquenchable. Linda, exhausted and radiant, watched her husband fall apart in the best possible way and understood, with absolute certainty, that whatever impossible force had brought 2 strangers together in a soul rainstorm had never been finished with its miracles. In the months that followed, as Seoul's whispers slowly transformed from scandal to legend, the Mafia boss and his foreign bride, blessed 5 times over in a single impossible conception, Junwoo built something he'd never imagined possible from the ashes of fear and violence. A home, loud, chaotic, utterly unlike the cold glass tower he'd once ruled alone, filled instead with the sound of 5 small heartbeats that had, against every odds, decided his world was worth choosing. Linda often caught him standing in the nursery doorway late at night, watching their children sleep with the same quiet, fierce intensity he'd once reserved for warehouses and war zones. Except now, that intensity had nowhere violent left to go. It simply stayed, steady and unshakable, wrapped around the family he'd once believed his world could never deserve. How is it possible, a reporter once dared ask him directly, that you of all men ended up with this? Seo Junwoo, unquenchable, untouchable, finally, fully unguarded, only smiled. Some things, he said simply, don't need an explanation. They just need someone brave enough to walk into the rain. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel.